Namaste everyone, I'm your co-host Shravani ma'am. Welcome to your favorite learning channel. The topic for today's video is types of respiration and difference between aerobic and anaerobic respiration. So this process of respiration is similar in case of plants and animals. So what happens usually is oxygen is inhaled or taken in inside our body and carbon dioxide is released into the atmosphere during this process of respiration. Okay. Now the oxygen that we take in, this oxygen is actually used to break down the glucose component of our food, and by this breakdown there is release of energy, and this energy is further used by our body to perform all the activities of the body. Okay, so we can say that respiration, okay, we can indicate it by an equation, and here we can say that glucose, this is C6H12O6, the glucose, it is coming from the food that we take in, it is broken down by oxygen, or we can say it is broken down or oxidized. The glucose gets oxidized and this results in the release of carbon dioxide, water in the form of vapors, and this releases energy. This is what happens during respiration, and from respiration we get the energy which is much needed for performing the body activities. Now this process of respiration can be divided into two types, and this is on the basis of oxygen used or not. Respiration can be divided, and it is of two types based on the fact that oxygen is present or oxygen is used or not during the process of respiration. So let's see what are these two processes or two types of respiration. So one is aerobic respiration, and the other one is anaerobic respiration. Okay, so in aerobic respiration what happens is, it is a type of respiration that takes place, this is a type of respiration that takes place only in the presence of oxygen. Okay, and this process, it releases, this process of respiration, that is during aerobic respiration, there is a release of, or this type of respiration releases large amount of what, large amount of energy is released during aerobic respiration. Okay, so we can write the equation as, we can write it as, there is glucose is coming from the food that we are eating, and this glucose is broken down by oxygen, or the glucose gets oxidized, and this produces carbon dioxide, then water vapor, plus large amount of energy. Okay, and this type of aerobic respiration is performed in human beings. Okay, and the organisms that perform aerobic respiration are called aerobes. They are called aerobes. These are the organisms that can perform aerobic respiration. Okay, Now let's understand what happens in anaerobic respiration. So anaerobic respiration is a type of respiration that takes place in the absence of oxygen. Okay? And during this anaerobic respiration, small amount of energy is released, whereas in case of aerobic respiration we saw that large amount of energy was being released. Okay, now one equation we will see here of anaerobic respiration is that the glucose, okay, it is anaerobically broken down. So in the absence of oxygen, glucose is broken down by an organism called yeast. These yeasts are the organisms that perform anaerobic respiration. So in the absence of oxygen, glucose is here being broken down partially to form ethanol, carbon dioxide and small amount of energy. Okay, so here we can say that example of organisms that perform anaerobic respiration is, we can say, yeast, and these organisms that perform anaerobic respiration are called anaerobes. Okay, so this we saw in case of yeast. Okay, so yeast, what it does in the absence of oxygen, it partially breaks glucose molecules to form ethanol, carbon dioxide and small amount of energy. Now this process of anaerobic respiration can also be called as fermentation. Okay, so fermentation is the process in which yeast partially causes the breakdown of glucose to form ethanol, carbon dioxide and energy. So this process is also known as fermentation. Now one interesting thing is that our muscle cells also undergo or also perform anaerobic respiration at times. Okay, so this is, we'll say that the cells of our muscles at times can perform anaerobic respiration. Okay, so when does it happen? During excessive physical activity. Okay, during excessive physical activity like running or excessive physical exercise, during those times muscle cells require high or extra energy, high amount of energy or extra energy is required, which is not met which is not met by normal respiration. Okay, so during this time, that is during excessive physical activities, our muscle cells would require large amount or extra amount of energy, and during such time the oxygen availability in our body reduces because we are performing excessive physical activities. So during that time, to compensate the extra amount of energy, our muscle cells perform anaerobic respiration. So to obtain extra energy, to obtain extra energy, our muscle cells perform what? Anaerobic respiration. And this anaerobic respiration that is performed in our muscle cells, that results in the formation of lactic acid. So what happens is, the food, that is glucose part of the food, and this is in case of muscle cells, okay, it is broken down by anaerobic respiration, and this breakdown results in the formation of lactic acid and energy. So during excessive physical activity, to meet the extra energy requirement, as there is lower amount of oxygen during those times, our muscle cells undergo anaerobic respiration, and this results in the formation of lactic acid in the muscles, and accumulation of lactic acid in the muscles often lead to muscle pain. Okay, so now we will see what are the exact differences between aerobic and anaerobic respiration. Okay, so let's consider few parameters and then see what is the difference in aerobic and anaerobic respiration. So first parameter here we would consider is oxygen. So in case of aerobic respiration, oxygen is required. Okay, so we can say this respiration requires oxygen, whereas in case of anaerobic respiration, it does not require oxygen. Okay, then the second parameter is location. So here we can say that aerobic respiration occurs in cytoplasm, and mitochondria of the cells. Okay, because in case of human beings and other eukaryotic organisms, mitochondria is the site where aerobic respiration takes place, and in case of prokaryotes, in the cytoplasm, aerobic respiration takes place. Then anaerobic respiration, this occurs only in the cytoplasm. It occurs only in the cytoplasm of the cell. Okay, and in case of animals like human beings, it occurs in muscle cells as well, and in muscle cells, their cytoplasm of the muscle cells is the place where anaerobic respiration takes place. Then third parameter is energy. So here more energy is released, and this energy is released in the form of ATP molecules, that is adenosine triphosphate molecules. In case of aerobic respiration, these molecules are released in larger amount, whereas in case of anaerobic respiration, less energy is released. Okay, then we will talk about the end products. What are the end products formed in these two types of respiration? So in case of aerobic respiration, carbon dioxide and water are the end products, and energy is released. Whereas in case of anaerobic respiration, lactic acid is formed. In case of animals, that is human beings we saw, and ethanol and carbon dioxide is the end product in case of yeast cells. Okay, so let's now quickly revise the things that we have studied. So we saw that respiration in plants and animals is of same type. Both the organisms, what they do is they take in oxygen and release carbon dioxide. So this oxygen is further utilized in the breaking down of glucose molecules present in the food, and this releases carbon dioxide, water and energy. So this is the general equation of respiration. Now, on the basis of oxygen is used or not during the process of respiration, respiration can be of two types. One is aerobic respiration and the other is anaerobic respiration. So, aerobic respiration is a type of respiration that only takes place in the presence of oxygen, and during this process, large amount of energy is released. Here we have seen equation that glucose in the food gets broken down or gets oxidized. So this breakdown of glucose is taking place in the presence of oxygen, and this is resulting in the release of carbon dioxide, water vapor and energy. So we have taken an example that human beings perform aerobic respiration and the organisms that perform aerobic respiration are called aerobes. Now, in case of anaerobic respiration, it is a type of respiration that takes place in the absence of oxygen, and during this process only a small amount of energy gets released. Here we have seen equation that glucose is being broken down, and here the breakdown of glucose is only partial, whereas in case of aerobic respiration the glucose breakdown is complete. But here, due to the absence of oxygen, glucose is partially broken down. Here we have taken an example of yeast that is breaking down glucose in the absence of oxygen, and this is resulting in the release of ethanol, carbon dioxide and energy. So example of an organism that performs anaerobic respiration is yeast, and the organisms that perform anaerobic respiration are called anaerobes. So this anaerobic respiration where yeast is breaking down or yeast is causing the change of glucose in the absence of oxygen, and it is causing its partial breakdown of glucose to form ethanol. This process is also known as fermentation. So one more example of anaerobic respiration we can see is in the cells of our muscles. So what happens is during the time of excessive physical activity, our body or the muscle cells require extra amount of energy, and during this time the oxygen level is low. So to meet this extra amount of energy, our muscle cells perform anaerobic respiration. So what happens? The glucose present in the food is anaerobically broken down to form lactic acid and energy. Then we differentiated aerobic and anaerobic respiration on a few parameters. So first parameter was oxygen. We saw that during aerobic respiration oxygen was required, but oxygen was not required in case of anaerobic respiration. Then location, we saw that aerobic respiration takes place in the cytoplasm and mitochondria of cells, whereas anaerobic respiration only takes place in the cytoplasm of the cell. Then based on energy, we saw that during aerobic respiration more amount of energy is released, whereas in anaerobic respiration less amount of energy is being released. Then end products formed during aerobic respiration are carbon dioxide and water, whereas in case of anaerobic respiration lactic acid is produced in case of animals, we saw in the case of muscle cells, whereas ethanol and carbon dioxide is produced in case of anaerobic respiration performed in yeast. Okay. So I hope you all would have got some great insights by watching today's video. Please do not forget to like and share the video. Till then, thank you for watching.